would be much different if I would have maybe heeded that advice earlier in my life. My whole existence, it seems, is marked by lots of different struggles. Yours probably is too. I don't think I'm unique in this. But what is interesting about my story is I can sort of pinpoint the moment that it all sort of began for me. For me, I was a fourth grader at the time, which would have made me about 9 years old. And that was the year that lust really began to sink its teeth pretty deep into me, as I was exposed to some magazines I shouldn't have been looking at, which eventually turned into some websites I shouldn't have been going to, which eventually turned into an over decade-long addiction. That same year, for whatever reason, I started to overeat. Right, so as a fourth grader, a 9-year-old, I was about 115 pounds. I don't know what it is in gigawatts, whatever you guys measure it in. But by the time I got to high school, I was about 260 pounds. Yeah, go figure. My last name is Needham, right? What do you expect? It's not. What was he thinking? I don't know. What was he thinking? It's funny, and then it's also not at all. But by the time I was in high school, I was just a really self-indulgent guy. I just did what I wanted, and I suffered the consequences for it. And I'm going to be real honest with you right now. Even when Jesus was introduced to me as a sophomore in high school, so about 15 years old at the time, even when the cross was explained to me for the first time, how he took my debt upon himself and bore it on the cross, and this beautiful exchange happened where he gave me his righteousness, I gave him my sin, I was saved, I was adopted into God's family. Even in that beautiful transaction, if I'm being honest, after that, not a whole lot changed for me. Some of the little behaviors did, but the big boy issues remained pretty intact. And I'm talking to a room that's big enough that it was a law issue. Like the biggest problem with it was that God had given me his commandments and I was violating those commandments, right? And that is true when we sin. But if that is all that sin is to you and me, what becomes the antidote? What becomes the remedy by which we get rid of it? Just stopping, right? If it's about not breaking the law, then the remedy is don't break the law. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work a little bit harder, try a little bit harder, implement a new method, a new strategy, and beat it. By the way, how's that working for you here in the Philippines? In Texas, it doesn't work very good, but maybe it's different here, is it? No, probably not. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. It doesn't work. It doesn't work to just try methods at stopping, because there's a deeper issue than it being us breaking God's law. And I know this because I was reading the Word. I was reading the Old Testament and was being blown away by what I was discovering. I don't know if you've spent much time in your Old Testament. I feel like they need to retitle the whole thing the Book of Human Train Wrecks, right? It is just so jacked up. We get 2 good chapters out of that puppy and then it heads south really quick. Adam and Eve, we can all agree that was a fail, right? But it doesn't stop there, right? It doesn't just stop with individuals, it moves to national sins, and not just like other nations, but God's nation, right? Israel. When you're reading this Old Testament, I mean, just the most jacked up, messed up things you can imagine. Not like bad, like I coveted my neighbor's goat bad. That's bad, I guess. I'm talking bad like me and my wife started a fire. We took our infant, we threw him in the fire to sacrifice them to our gods. Bad. I'm talking about going into the temple of God and sleeping with prostitutes to appease false gods. This is what the nation of Israel was doing. Wicked, wicked things. In the book of Jeremiah, and he puts it like this. Jeremiah 2:13. My people, God says, have committed two evils against me. One, they have forsaken me, the fountain of living water. Two, they have dug for themselves wells, broken wells that cannot hold water. He could have said anything. He could have named all the things that they did. But the first thing he wanted them to know was, do you know what your main issue is, Israel? It's that I'm like water to you, and you are not thirsty for me. And that is your crime. We get it a different way in the New Testament. It's even fuller of a picture in the New Testament. Consider this for a moment. What are the first couple things we learn about Jesus in our New Testament? We learn that he was born in a town called Bethlehem, and that he was born into a manger. That might seem insignificant to you, but consider for a moment that the word Bethlehem in the Hebrew means house of bread, and that a manger is a feeding trough for animals to eat out of. So the God of the universe, born into the house of bread, born into a feeding trough, you think he might be trying to tell us something about himself? And then for the rest of his ministry, he starts saying the wackiest things about himself. He starts calling himself things like living water and new wine. And my personal favorite, John 6:35, Jesus said to him, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never hunger. He who believes in me will never thirst. I thought my crime before God was primarily judicial, primarily a law issue. And as I sat with him in the Word, I realized that no, my crime, our crime here before God is not primarily one of law. It's primarily one of appetite. He is water, and we won't drink. And he is like bread, and we won't eat. And he is like a meal laid out before us forever. Me getting on the internet to look at that stuff. And 2 weeks turned into 2 months, and 2 months turned into 6 months, and I'm standing here before you tonight by God's grace over 9 years outside of a pornography addiction. That same month, I started to lose weight, and I didn't even know it. I wasn't even trying. There was no diet plan, okay? Over the course of about 7 months, I went from 260 pounds to 190 pounds. I lost 70 pounds in the process. I dropped 2 shoe sizes. It was very expensive, my weight loss program. A lot of wardrobes being purchased. You know how I did it? It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a new method. It wasn't just giving my password to another person or locking my pantry up. It was none of that. I feasted on Jesus. I started to sit with his word and not just read it for clues on how to be a better person, but read it in such a way that I was looking at the face of Jesus to delight in him, to see his character and his attributes and his promises, to treasure him. And as my view of God grew and expanded, the things of this world, like that old hymn says, grew strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. It's primarily about an all-satisfying God condescending to rescue wicked people who could then enjoy that satisfying God for eternity.
Sounds like John
That's
Piper.
Christianity.
It sounds like John
And
Piper.
let me tell you, the more you enjoy Him, the more your actions will change, but it cannot flip. I want to share a song with you. I want to share a song in hopes that God would awaken you and me more to see Him as supremely enjoyable, and to maybe help us identify those thieves in our life that are robbing us of an appetite for